Well, welcome and thank you very much indeed for coming. My name is George Bowen. Ladies who don't know me, I'm helping Ron with the Mannkal Foundation.
You're the CEO.
For my sins.
I'm helping you.
Still new. Ron gave me a list of the things which he didn't want to do. So those are the ones I've got to do. And we're working up to it slowly. We've actually had two events today because some of you were at the Hyatt for lunch today with Dan Hannum, which was an interesting time, and now we're very lucky to have Ken Phillips, and I'll hand over to Ron to introduce Ken.
Thanks, George. Thanks, George, and welcome, folks. Ken Phillips is a remarkable guy. He's one of the only 3 people in Australia that has a complete understanding of the 3 things that have gone wrong in Australia's industrial relations situation and why our productivity has been slipping in respect to the world competitiveness. It's terrible that there are not more than 3 people that have a full understanding, because the answer is so simple. And the other 2 people I must mention, in all fairness, is Robert Gottliebsen, the journalist, and
Grace Collier.
The famous Grace Collier, who you read Robert Gottliebsen's stuff, and Grace Collier was with the Financial Review, but you know, she's writing with the Australian, so she's got a wider audience. They've penetrated and they've found out what has gone wrong, and I'm not going to spoil Ken's speech, but they've pulled out the agreements that weak management has signed, and they pulled out those agreements, and they're up on the websites. So any of us can read those agreements and weep that we've got ourselves into this position. So Ken, it's with great gratitude and great pleasure that we bring you to West Australia to talk to this bunch who'll go out and tell all their friends, and then when you talk to us next time, we'll have a much bigger audience. Thanks, Ken.
Thanks, Ron. Well, look, thanks for having me. And there are three major things I like about Perth. The weather. You don't have to wear a tie. It's fabulous. And Mannkal, of course, you know, naturally. Look, what I'll do is I tend to sort of paint a big broad picture and then come in on specifics. So that's my normal sort of process. And the big broad picture, any economists here? Mannkal, there'd be some economists, right? No economists? One economist. I'm going to be rude to economists. I've got to say that there are very few economists that I've ever met who actually understand how an economy operates. And the reason I say that is a very simple fact, and I'll sort of come to all the points, I'll pull everything together where it comes back to the points that Ron's asked me to talk about. Of Australia's workforce of about 11.5 million, about 9.5 million are in the private sector, and 7.5 million of those are in small business, working in small business. And that's businesses up to only about maximum of 50 people. So I'm not talking 200 or that sort of thing. And when you talk to economists and get to understand where economists are coming from, and you Haig, the theory of the firm by Coase, etc., the concept of the firm that economists deal with is that the firm is a command and control pyramid. That's essentially essentially a communist organisation, and that the people inside the firm work for the benefit of the firm. And the reality is that that model, and economists see small business as a smaller version of that model. And that's how they conceive that an economy operates. Small business isn't that. Small business is where the heartbeat of your entrepreneurship comes from, and it's where the heartbeat of your economy is. And the reason is that the distinct difference between that pyramid command and control view of business and the small business, in the command and control pyramid, just like a public service, no one is responsible for anything. If the company makes a loss, none of the people who work in the firm share in that loss. They might lose their job, but they are not responsible for the loss. They haven't got their arse on the line. In the small business sector, the person who owns the business, if they make a loss, the loss comes out of the mortgage on their house, the holiday they can't take their children on, the school fees they can't pay, or the loss of the house. And so being in small business, and being a small business operator or working in small business, is an intensely personal, emotional, human experience. Whereas the whole concept of the firm itself, under the economist thinking and the Coasian thinking, is that the firm is there to isolate the individual from the marketplace. So the reason I say that economists don't understand how an economy operates is because they don't understand small business. Because if an economy is going to operate, every individual must feel the impact of the marketplace on them personally. And you respond and react to that in a very personal way. So if you're, I've worked for myself for 25 years. I've had no one protecting me. I've been on the verge of bankruptcy. I had retail shops that got caught up in Keating's recession that we had to have. When I realised, it was an extraordinary experience, people who walked into my shops, they had no interest in whether I was making money or not. And when, during Keating's recession, the sales were going like that and kept falling through the floor, no matter what I did, they didn't care. There was no emotional connection with me over the pain and the problems that I was going through. But those pain and problems are intensely personal, affecting your family, your relationship with your spouse, with your partner, with your children, with your extended family. And so the whole concept of business is a completely different concept when you deal at the small business end. Now, where does that all relate to industrial relations? So that's the broad picture. And then look at where politics is now sitting. And look at what Abbott is now doing. Abbott is in the process of changing the politics of Australia. We will never return to where we have been. Abbott has realised, in my view, how to deconstruct Australia's Berlin Wall. Since Marxism, and particularly after the First World War and beyond that, the politics of Australia has been very straightforward, very simple. Left and right, we both know the paradigms we operate. The left look after the workers, the right look after the bosses, and therefore that's the political paradigm. And the collapse of the Berlin Wall caused that paradigm to sort of go all over the place. The left in Australia were extremely smart because in and around 2000, there were a lot of left-wing writers in Australia who were saying, look, we're in crisis because clearly capitalism, or the market has won. It delivers jobs, it delivers economic growth, and it's the thing that removes poverty. Whereas communism doesn't remove poverty, communism creates poverty. We recognise that. So what the left have done is reconstituted how they sell their pitch. Now, oddly, within the Labor movement, within the Labor Party, the hard left, the really hard left, now dominate incredibly. The era of Hawke, of middle ground, common sense Hawke, is well and truly gone. The Labor Party and the union movement are just dominated by the hardcore 60s children who are still playing their student union politics. And they are true believers in this, in the marketing. But what they've done is overlaid it with a new narrative, and overlaid it with what I've referred to in an article I had in the Australian on the establishment. And once again, I'll get to the IR side of it, and you'll see the connection fairly soon. So what has happened in Australia, in an economy that is really very small? Now we know no larger than the economy of New York. And like when I come to Perth and walking around Perth with my clients, you know, I find my clients going, "Oh, no, Tom, no, everyone knows everyone," and that's across Australia. It's a very small club, very small establishment. And so what we've actually got, what I've called it, is the new establishment. And the establishment in Australia is not the conservative side of politics or the conservative side of business. The establishment in Australia is a deal-making process in which large companies get together with unions, and the large company will do any dirty IR deal that you need to do, and the union's game is then to lobby government for whatever the big business needs. Environmental approval, planning approvals, electricity connections, and government subsidies. And so in actual fact, the big business establishment that plays this game give money to both sides of politics so that they can hide underneath what they're really doing. And they are absolute political prostitutes, a term I used in the article. And so they throw money at either side. And the magnificence, the absolute magnificence of the establishment has been their capacity to beguile the conservative side in politics into thinking that they're white guys, that they're the good guys on the side of the market. These people are not on the side of the market at all. They are on the side of the deal that they need to do to get whatever they need. These large companies operate on a global scale. Whether they do business in Australia or do it somewhere else, they don't care. Right? If they make money in Australia because it works in a particular way, they'll do the deal there. If the costs go up in Australia and you can't do the business, they just do it somewhere else. BHP, they're not an Australian company, good grief. Right? These are people, now they're individuals within the corporations who are genuine nationalists, believe in Australia, develop Australia. They're individual beliefs like that. But the behaviour of them as a corporation is to be complete prostitutes in every way. That's what a corporation does. Abbott and sufficient number of people in the Abbott team have realised this. And they realised under Howard how they were abandoned by big business on the industrial relations reforms. Not only abandoned, but completely trashed. And then when Labor gets in, big business just sold its soul to the ALP. Why? It was simply part of the deal making. The Australian Industry Group were front and centre at organising this. So the industry associations are an intimate part of this process, of the deal-making process that goes down. So what's Abbott done recently? You'll notice that he's now made a change to industrial relations like we have never seen before in this country. And in doing that, he is changing the fundamental processes of politics in Australia. The state Liberal governments or state Liberal parties have not twigged. They have not woken up to what's going on. They are still in the political narrative, rabbits caught in the spotlight. But Abbott's woken up. Abbott is a very cunning politician because he never explains his narrative. he keeps everyone guessing as to what it is. But I reckon I've got him. I reckon I've got him tweaked, and so I'll let you in on the secret, right? Whether I'm right or not, you can sort of gauge that for yourselves. But what he's turned around and done, and he said to these businesses, "You want money from me, or an approval from us, or you want this, or you want that, guys? Guys and gals, we've had a look at your IR arrangements. I reckon they stink. If you fix them, come back and talk to us." It's a very simple message. What he's doing here is driving commercial change. He's changing the commercial dynamic. Remember, a very small economy in comparative terms. Very small number of people who are players at the serious end of the economy. The rest of us are rats and mice. But the mining tax is a clear demonstration of that. You had the three big miners get together to screw over all the other smaller miners. That was the deal that was done. This is not about Australia or the mining industry. The deal that was done with Gillard between the three big miners was about looking after the deal making for the three big miners, and the rest of you can go look after yourselves. That's the deal that was cut. And so these were part of the lessons that Abbott was looking at and has realised. So his message to big business now is quite clear. We're not going to give money to a company that runs itself badly. And the articles by Grace Collier, Robert Gottlieb's and myself, we've been thumping that message home by forensically looking at the quality of the management of these companies, and it stinks. Stinks. These people do not care about Australia or making a profit in Australia or looking after where we're going. They care about doing the deal, and they will do a deal to screw themselves over. Examples. The closure of Alcoa in Geelong. Now, that plant's 40 years old. It's at the end, well and truly at the end of its life, its design cycle. It has to close. It's far too small a plant. It uses too much electricity. It can't produce. It doesn't matter what they do. It's just at the end of its design life. So it was going to close no matter what happened. But 2 years ago, Julia Gillard gave Alcoa $40 million to stay open. Now, Grace Collier exposed that I think a week after that $40 million was paid across, the company agreed to a 12% increase in wages for the workers. 20 million of the 40 million went on those wages. This is clear legalised corruption. The industrial relations system is a process of legalising corrupt behaviour. So the unions lobbied the Gillard government. Gillard government gives $40 million across, and half of it goes to the workers. Right? It's a corrupt process in any person's language. There's Leo. He's here. He's talking to Leo from Brazil. I said, why have you come to Australia? He said, because there's too much corruption in Brazil and I can't do business. Well, Leo, I'm sorry. We're as corrupt as Brazil, and what we've done is we've gone and legalised a whole lot of it, right? Just that we're corrupt in a much more sophisticated way. And the Toyota, Ford, Holden agreements. These agreements, now I understand this is a great point that Grace Collier has made. There's nothing in the Industrial Relations Act that requires any company to enter any agreement of any sort. Zero. I had a meeting with the head of the MBA here last time I was here at the end of January, and he started on to me, oh, but the companies, they all have to enter these agreements because Julia Gillard's legislation requires it. I just went through the roof on the guy. You know, blatant lie. So what's happening is these companies are entering these agreements of their own free will. This is not something they're made to do. I work with companies all the time where they'll find themselves in the smaller businesses, find themselves in industrial relations, the union wanting an EBA, and I spend an enormous amount of time with the managers getting them to understand that they don't have to sign an agreement, and we work with them to make sure that we play the game so they wind up staying on the award. And the effort that we have to go to get them to understand that simple issue. That's understandable. These people, they're not professional IR people. They don't play the game. They're engineers, they're managers, they're running a factory or whatever it might be, and they suddenly find themselves with these IR negotiations and they're just babes in the wood. And they don't know what the truth is. So there's no legal requirement. You have to play the game, but there's no legal requirement. So you look at the industrial relations agreements and what Grace has been pulling out and so forth. And for me, this all comes back to 2002 when I was doing stuff with the Institute of Public Affairs, and pull me up when I'm on time if I'm talking too long. Institute of Public Affairs, and I invented a thing called the Capacity to Manage Index. And over a 5-year period, we looked at, designed the whole thing and looked at about 350 EBAs and rated the EBAs around capacity to manage. So when you get an EBA, an industrial instrument, instead of looking at it from the worker perspective, and you say, let's have a look at the clauses and how they impact on the capacity of the managers to run the business. And what you found is that these enterprise agreements, even under Howard, deconstructed the ability of a company to run their business. And the typical clause to look for, and Grace has been pulling all of these out and publicising them, but I've got it all documented. I'd love to have the money to be able to reactivate the Capacity to Manage Index and do a comparison now to all the stuff that we did, what's now 5 years ago, and draw the comparison. So typical clauses that you're looking at. EBAs will have a clause that says that there'll be a consultative committee. And so then you go through and you have a look at the powers of the consultative committee. And you have a look at the membership of the committee. So you look to see, does the committee actually, does it consult, or does it actually have the power to make decisions or stop decisions being made, more to the point? And you look at the number of people on the committee, 5 workers and 5 managers. And you go through and you can start to look at how this structure operates. And I first came across this and got alerted to it when the original Arnott's factory was in Burwood in Melbourne, if any of you remember. And that's since closed and it moved to Queensland. And the Arnott's factory in Melbourne had these consultative committees and all of this sort of process. And the managers there said to me, Ken, we can't even, we're not even allowed to decide which drivers have mobile phones. We have to get approval from the consultative committee. We can't organise the rounds for the delivery drivers unless we get approval from the consultative committee. And they said, etc., 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 etc. Every aspect of running the business needed approval from the consultative committee. And in the Toyota EBA, there's a whole string of things running through there. Anything that the managers seek to do, it can cause an industrial dispute. So we want to change the rosters because production's dropped, or we need to drop production or lift production. We need to change the rosters. We have to go to the consultative committee. If we don't go to the consultative committee and get approval from the consultative committee, that is a cause for an industrial dispute, and we can go to the Industrial Relations Commission. So you go to the Industrial Relations Commission, you bring in lawyers, and you spend about $30,000 or $40,000 on the lawyers in the Industrial Relations Commission. That'll roll out for about 5 or 6 months, and by the time you've got a decision from the Industrial Relations Commission, the reason that you've actually had for changing the rosters has already changed, and you need to do it all over again. So the senior corporates have done deals at the big end of town with the unions and stripped their own line managers from any capacity to run the business. There is our Berlin Wall. And Abbott is in the process of pulling it down. Not through legislation, but through changing the commercial dynamic. If my thesis on this is correct, I hope it is, and if Abbott continues this, and I think he will, we're on the verge of a productivity explosion in Australia. We will see the death of businesses that deserve to die because they are badly managed, and thank God that the car industry is going, because you and I will be able to buy cars $2,000 or $3,000 cheaper, and some other small, poor mug taxpayers in some other country will be subsidising the cars that we're buying. Thank you very much. I'm very glad that they do. And we will not have badly run businesses here. We'll start to see businesses that make money. I've got a client in a very traditional industrial relations hellhole, very traditional old-style factory, about 300 people working the factory. About 6 years ago, they had a 6-week strike. I became involved with them. I supply in independent contractors to sort of help them through and provide strategies. They said, Ken, we're never employing anyone again. We're going to have independent contractors. We've basically removed the industrial relations problems. This is still the highest cost production plant of any of the 11 plants of this company worldwide. They could close it tomorrow and bring in the product from overseas. They don't want to because they want to stay close to their client base. Currently spending $10 million upgrading the plant, the first upgrade to the plant in 50 years, since the 1950s. Right? What's the key factor? They are managing their plant. That's the key factor. And the people overseas have confidence in the managers here to give the thing a bloody good shot, and these people are being affected by all the normal stuff to do with you know, the Australian dollar, all of those problems. They've got all of them. But we've fixed the IR side. We haven't fixed the IR. That's not what it's about. We've allowed the managers to manage. That's what it's about. So I'm hopeful that Abbott has started something here that he will continue. I am hopeful that the other people in his party at the federal level who don't yet understand this, and there are plenty of them who don't, that the penny will eventually drop. I'm not hopeful about the capacity of the Liberal state governments to understand this. I think they're still going to trundle on the way they are and wonder why they're not winning on the narrative. But I'm, as I said, very hopeful with Abbott and where he's going, and fingers crossed it keeps going in this direction. So there's my thesis.
Can we have some questions?
Again, what do you think of the Productivity Commission? How would you like it changed, if at all?
Well, the product.
Repeat the question again.
What do I think of the Productivity Commission and what change they can make? And what the look, the Productivity Commission's a pack of economists. I just expressed a view about economists. But they are genuine researchers, and my experience, I gave about 15 years ago, gave a talk to a whole lot of the staff of the Productivity Commission, and I said to them, firms are not motivated by profit, and I was just about, you know, shock horror. I said, the motivation of firms is the personal career interests of the people who work in the firms. It's not the profit of the firm. They don't care, right? And there was this huge argument amongst all the staff because I said to them, it's no different from the Productivity Commission, right? And so there was this huge argument. None of them ever wanted to talk to me again. So look, they will do a very professional job at bringing in all of the reports that they get, looking at it all, and based on what people have said to them and what they read, they will produce a report. I don't know what the report will say, but are these people who have experienced the near death of their own business, suffered losses, understood what it means to run their own business? They understand it in an academic sense, they don't understand it here. And if you don't understand it here, you really don't, that's why I say economists don't understand how an economy operates. So look, you know, something like the productivity, and look at the politics of the way Abbott operates. In his book Battle Lines, he says if it doesn't appear in the major press, it doesn't exist. So what's the Productivity Commission about? This is Abbott managing his politics, and it's about getting the reports that he needs, that generates the coverage in the media, to be able to see if he's, and then watching his private polling to see if where the community is sitting on the particular issue, and then he will move as far as he feels that he can move politically. So that's my reading of what he does. And mate, so all he's doing is the same game that the left do brilliantly well, and that the right side of politics, just particularly at the state government level, just don't know how to play, not interested in playing. So that's my, like, I love the people of the Productivity Commission, but they're there to do a job.
Okay, how can these state Liberal governments be woken up, and what contribution do you think they can make? The state Liberal governments.
State Liberal governments. Well, so what can be done to wake up the state Liberal governments, and can they wake up? Right?
Yeah, and what could their contribution then be?
And what can their contribution be? So the state governments are glorified local councils. So the space that they operate in is drains, trains, buses, roads, all that sort of stuff. Right? Pretty unsexy, and they're basic. So Abbott's got something like the industrial relations thing, because it's a cultural issue. IR is about the culture. He's got it, you know, da-da-da-da-da-da. But basically, state governments, particularly from the Liberal perspective, is all about how do we appear to be good managers? That's their current paradigm. So their paradigm is to say, if we're really good managers, the people will recognise that we're really good managers, and so therefore they'll re-elect us. That's the paradigm. Now, unfortunately, what happens is, in that sort of paradigm, what they attract in terms of the control of their narrative is corporate affairs type people who run their media. Corporate affairs people who aren't used to running media for large corporations, the primary task of that corporate affairs media manager is to ensure that the company name doesn't appear in the press at all. Right? Anything that smacks of any you do everything you can to eliminate it. So what's happening is that corporate affairs thinking is then used at the state government level. And in politics, that's death. Complete death, because in politics you have to get in there and you have to shove your narrative. It's a completely different process. So they've got the wrong people with them, and so what they have to recognise is the same point that Abbott has recognised. And politics in Australia is really, really simple. It's very straightforward. Whoever is seen to represent the little person wins. It is as straightforward as that. And what the state governments have to do is get their managerial stuff. Yeah, that's important. Your proper financial managers, all very important. But they have to create the narrative to ensure that they're redirecting the attention of the people and their political narrative, not to dry managerial issues, but to, we are here because we are looking after the little person, however you define that. So that's what they've got to do. So I see, you know, most state governments under the Liberals, most do a pretty good managerial job. You're not going to do everything well. You'll have a whole series of things that stuff up on you. That's just the nature of management. but there's attention to the narrative around that central idea of the little person that they have to get, and they just don't get it. Yeah.
You mentioned that you think Abbott's going to transform the IR landscape.
He's not only transforming the IR, he's transforming the political landscape.
But short of having another election with mandates to change the IR laws.
No, you don't have to change the IR laws.
What's he going to do now in practice?
You don't have to change the IR laws. That's the whole point about what he's done. He said, I will not change the IR laws. Now, once we have a change in the Senate, let's see what happens then. So he's made clear commitments. The, what is it? The ABCC. So you've got to clean up the construction sector. You've got the code of conduct for the code of construction that's coming through. I hope that we'll see that in WA in the not too distant future. Fingers crossed. He's turned around and said, look, you know, if you want money from us or agreements for us, look at your IR. Doing just that will cause more change to the IR landscape in Australia than any changes to the Industrial Relations Act. Now, the very fact that the Industrial Relations Act, there's nothing in it that requires anyone to enter an agreement. And there's not one company in Australia that needs to have an EBA. Not one. They choose to have an EBA. So it's vastly more important. That's where there was the message out of work choices. It's vastly more important to change the managerial behaviour of the companies than it is to change the legislation.
You talked about it, obviously, particularly the private sector tonight, but of course unions are at their strongest, certainly in terms of numbers, or essentially the workforce in the public sector. And would you see any parallel between what you talked about in terms of pressure unions are able to bring to bear in the construction industry, in the private sector, and the hold they have over state governments, who will often go in with the intention of pulling back the public sector payroll, but in the end are intimidated by their own public service and into not doing so.
The public sector area is a completely different kettle of fish. It has to be approached from a totally different angle. What we've had is a mono approach to industrial relations in Australia. It just simply doesn't relate to the managerial realities of the sectors. So I've been public and I've recommended to Abbott and his people, I said next agenda you have 3 industrial relations systems. One for small business, one for big business and one for the public sector. Right? You split it up because the managerial processes are distinctly different between the 3. So in the public sector, I was originally a primary school teacher and was an active union official while I was a teacher, and subsequently I worked for a teacher union. The public sector is the perfect communist organisation. There is no employer. The employer is a legal figment. The employer at law, I think, is Cabinet. Cabinet comes and goes. Cabinet changes, or if it's the minister who's the legal employer, it's the minister who changes. They don't, under the Constitution, hold legal responsibility for the actions that they've taken. So therefore you've got this, separation of powers, all that sort of stuff. So in actual fact, there's no one responsible. In small business, the dynamic's entirely different because the person who owns the business is entirely responsible personally. In a public sector, in a large company or in a company structure, particularly if it becomes a public corporation, there's a notional responsibility, but it's only notional. No one really is responsible for anything. In the public sector, that's taken to a whole other level. So what happens in the public sector is, in actual fact, the whole public sector is set up as a managerial process, and the people at the top of the managerial tree control it and are the notional representatives of the employer. But again, there's no one in there who's actually responsible for anything. So And then what happens is the people down the chain, if you talk to nurses, you talk to teachers, talk to paramedics, you go through the whole thing, police, you'll find the most single emotion that they have about their job is frustration. The biggest single emotion that they have. And they're frustrated because basically what happens is it's management through ministerial press release. And there's no real, you know, it really is a them and us, because a bureaucracy is this great amorphous thing where there's no one responsible anywhere, and that you, if you're here and want to do your job properly, or there are things that are frustrating you about the job, you can't get anything to move. When I go into factories and work with companies that'll have an industrial relations problem, half the time we'll go out and we'll do a little walk around the factory, and you'll find that someone's standing on the floor, and they're standing on the concrete floor all day and their feet bloody well hurt. Go and buy them a mat to stand on, for God's sake. And there you've gone and fixed. You've just fixed an industrial relations problem. You'll go into their staff room and you'll find they've got broken chairs. For God's sake, go down to Bunnings and buy some bloody chairs that aren't broken. And you've fixed the industrial relations problem. A whole lot of the time in the public sector, that sort of minutiae of decision making just doesn't happen. And so people get very frustrated. So I can in actual fact see and absolutely understand why people in the public sector belong to unions, because it's the only countervailing balance they've got against this machine that really is faceless and untouchable, and you're working against a system and you can't work with a person. And so incredibly frustrating. And the frustration I deal with is sort of frustration being a lobbyist all the time, because I always liken lobbying, it's the same way. Lobbying a public sector is like running your fingers through a blancmange. You've just got to keep doing it, and it just keeps staying there the whole time. So I think that the dynamic in the public sector is completely different. And what has to happen is that, and this is very difficult to achieve, the cabinets have to realise and think about it a different way. And I've had this discussion with Abbott and his people, and they've asked me the same question. And I said, guys, I'd need to sit down with you and talk to you for quite a while. Let's get to understand various sectors, because I don't know. And the other thing with the unions in the public sector, they tend not to be corrupt. It's not like the CFMEU. You don't have this overt, ugly corruption, money under the table, etc., etc. The public sector unions tend to be pretty clean, I think. So you've got quite a different dynamic in my view, and I don't have the solution for it. Although I would love to get engaged to be able to work with people, because one of the things I find is that, the same with you get in a factory environment, you start talking to the managers and you start talking to this, and you get out and you talk on the shop floor and you start talking to a whole lot of people, and then the real problems start to be identified. When you identify the real problem, then you start to identify the real solution. And it's not to go and have a big argument with the union.
Well, I think you were right. I fear that though, in some sense, the state shoving level, the unions have gone way beyond challenging, the bureaucracy. They are challenging democracy in a very dangerous and very frightening way. I think one of the big examples police unions in states like Queensland and Victoria, where they are so powerful they essentially hold the state executives in a sense of fear. And it does lead to corruption. It does allow corruption to flourish. So I wonder how you deal with that.
Well, the first thing is, a lot of the stuff, if I was, and I think Ronald loved me for this, if I had my druthers and I was, king for the day, I'd start working through a whole series of processes. I'd privatise every school, and I'd fund them out of Treasury, and I'd make the school the employer of the teachers, and they would run like any medium to small business or even large business. Let them run. All the stupid things of this crossover of responsibilities in the health area, you'd do what they've done in Canada, which Abbott's pointed to, and I think they've eliminated the federal health department, for example. So you eliminate one level of bureaucracy, so you get decision-making light chains much clearer. Privatise all the hospitals where right? So I'd be a mad deconstruction of the public sector into small business units. But then you come to the hardcore, such as your issues around the police and so forth. Then you're in a much tougher area, and once again, no easy solutions, because do you privatise your police force? You can't sort of structurally look for the solution on this sort of stuff. So other. Sorry. Yeah. What I'm one of these people who sort of says, okay, look, here's all the problems of the world, and these are the things that at the moment I think that I can see how we could do things about them, and I'll take that step, and then if we get lucky we'll take the next step, and if we get lucky take the next step, and all these ones right up here, if we get to them in my lifetime, well, let's have a think about it then, but I don't think I will. Yeah, so there's stuff that I put into the too hard basket, I'll admit defeat.
Any more questions? I just think, I've got 2 minutes, just like to add a bit of my own story. After the business school, I was given a printing company in the mid-70s, and the owner said to me, if you can pay us pensions, we'll let you have the company. It wasn't that much of a gift, it was making a loss at the time. And I built it up with a great deal of difficulty and sold it, but I'm absolutely identified with what Ken said about the pain of small business. You are on the line. You can go bust, your house, your family. So that really chimed a bell. And then after Thatcher, I got a job for a while, for 3 or 4 years, with an offshoot of an American consultancy, which was going into companies and really doing what the managers should have done for themselves. And taking heads off the payroll, I'm afraid. That's what it was. I was known as the laughing executioner, because I had this smile on my face, but everybody knew what consultants were doing. And one of the tricks we had is we take the paperwork from the beginning of the initiation of the order to the final dispatch, and we'd stick all these bits of paper on a roll of brown paper, and we roll this paper out right to the other end of the block, with all the bits of paper that these companies were going through to get a simple order from the start to the finish. And it was, as Ken says, when you get inside the factory, it's all very simple. It's about toilet cleaning and mats for tired feet. There were 1 or 2 issues on big business that we might discuss at another point, but what I'd like to do now is to call on Paul to give a vote of thanks.
Paul the economist.
Well, thanks very much, Kim. That was a fantastic speech, and I appreciate the insights from the personal perspective, even the anecdotes about when Buckridge and so forth. Just hearing about the fact that Tony Abbott is on that mission, and that we can have confidence that this won't be another sort of steady hand on the tiller government, maybe pushing back a bit to have the other side come back one day and push the other way even further, but changing that full paradigm. So I'd like to present you with a bottle of Mannkal wine and one of our reports. Just a few words. Don't be too hard on economists, because not all of them were trained at Mannkal, but we're working on it. So thank you very much. again, thank you very much, Ken,
Thank
and everyone, please feel welcome to hang around, have another drink and a chat.
What a
Thank
good
you for
idea.
coming.
Yeah.